Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer Ryan Harlan and Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host T.J. Mathewson. We're coming to you guys following Oregon State's loss to San Jose State. We're also going to be previewing the matchup with Air Force on Saturdays. The Beavers have just 3 games left in the 2024 season, sit with a 4-5 record. Obviously a disappointing loss for the Beavers this last weekend at home against San Jose State. Several things went wrong for the Beavers in that matchup, and we kind of talked about it in our takeaways at Beavers Edge. Ryan and I also broke it down in our post-game breakdown video. We'll kind of examine, now that we've had some time to reflect, some of the the good, the bad, the ugly. You could even say the mediocre, the bad, and the ugly about that performance, because it was another rough performance for Oregon State in several regards, but like everything, there's always some positives you can look for. So we're going to be diving into that, and then obviously getting into Air Force this weekend, what presents a very winnable game for Oregon State, for the sense that Air Force sits 2-7 on the year, but it's on the road, and Oregon State on the road this season has been an up and down play. So obviously a lot to get into with the Falcons this weekend as well, and we'll maybe mention the basketball teams as well. So lots to get into here today on the Edge podcast. Welcome back, the fellas, guys. Good to see you. Good to see you again, since we saw each other at Reeser on Saturday for what was not quite the performance I don't think any of us were expecting. Let's go ahead and start with you, TJ. Obviously that game, it was a big game in the sense of like a lot of things determined it, but it really felt like the pick six from Ben Branson was just the nail in the coffin for that game. How did you feel?
One of, if not the most disappointing loss, I would say, in the 4 years that I've been here. And you take the quality of opponent into consideration with this. And, I was talking about this with a couple of callers on the post-game show after the fact, just understanding just the difference in resources that these two programs that faced off on Sunday have available to them when it comes to football. And 2 first-year head coaches playing at home, knowing what you need to do to make a bowl game, and to score 13 points. 13 points against San Jose State, who had just lost to Fresno State by 23 points. The same Fresno State team who lost to Air Force, who had only beaten Merrimack, who the Beavers will play this weekend. It's not a good look at all for what happened. And I don't think, even watching the game, that San Jose State came to Reeser and played some unbelievable game. They didn't.
Right.
Half those passes they were throwing down the field with their spread and shred, they weren't even on the same page when it came to the quarterback Walker Agate and some of those receivers when he was throwing deep balls. Half the time they're not looking up. Half the time he's overthrowing it. It wasn't all that efficient, but it was still enough to beat the Beavers in a game they frankly needed to have. They gained a ton of yards, but when the big plays came and the Beavers needed to make them, they didn't. Down in the red zone a handful of times, didn't come away with many points. Ben Branson, as you mentioned, threw a just atrocious pick. Terrible.
It's tough.
Pick six.
Tough.
That was a big reason they fell behind. This could have very easily been like a 14-point Beaver win, but they didn't execute the plays they needed to get that. And instead, they're having to essentially get hit on the chin with just a bad loss, just atrocious.
Ryan, let's go over to you, because you kind of talked about that a little, or rather we talked about it a little bit at the end and in our takeaways. Just that TJ mentioned, the opportunity to win this game by multiple scores was there. Does that sound, familiar? Go back to UNLV with a 17-6 lead at one point. You go back to Colorado State when they had a double-digit lead in that. They still won that game. But we wrote about those drives where you had first and goal from the 4 or 5, and you came away with no points. That was brutal. Then the very next drive, you throw the pick six. So, I mean, that sequence, like we've seen where, like, it's odd because like TJ said, Nick Nash, Justin Larkhart, no problem racking up the yards in this one. I mean, you look between the two of them, 11 catches for, 280 yards. I mean, like TJ said, Walker, you get 395 on the day. I mean, we knew that Oregon State's secondary had some struggles, and sure, you saw some good things in the run defense game, but if you're San Jose State, why would you need to run? So, my question to you is, obviously they're going to play a more run-based team this weekend. We'll get into that later, but just How do you think they got scorched just so bad? And that all being said, look back, like if you allowed 24 points, wouldn't you think that would still be a winnable number at home? Like for your
Oh
offense to
yeah,
score
yeah.
13. Like, you know what I mean? Like 24, you go, okay, that's not great, but it doesn't seem like an insurmountable number. So I don't think you can lay it all at the feet of the defense either.
No, and sure, like nearly giving up 400 yards passing to not even the starting quarterback for San Jose State
Even
and backup and Wyatt Egan, but like I really think the fact that you weren't able to capitalize on those drives just kind of, hurt yourself a lot. And even Egan wasn't very efficient in how much he was passing either, because it could have been a lot worse. Could have
a
been a
lot of
lot
drops.
worse.
A lot of
You
drops.
could have given up a lot more points if you were, if you were that secondary. But the fact that, a lot of drops, a lot of overthrows, I think kind of helped save in part on that. Plus that big interception from Cy was also a big moment that they could have capitalized on. But I think on the ensuing offensive possession, couldn't really do much of. But I think generally speaking, where I probably lay most of the blame on is the offense from that game. Just the fact that you made it down in the red zone 4 times, you only come away with 13 points.
Boom.
That's inexcusable.
And
Simply put.
Oh,
and only 3 points on those drives that actually went into the red zone.
Yeah,
Like 13 points total for the game,
yeah.
but
and
those red
that's,
zone drives like
yeah.
combined for 3 points.
And to your point, Ryan, that's now two straight games with one touchdown.
Right. It's
I
a
mean,
problem.
that is going to win you no games unless you're rocking a vintage, Iowa defense out
Right.
there. You know what I mean? Like two touchdowns. I mean,
So what do we think is the issue here, really? Because it's true that the Beaver offense was actually a little bit more explosive with Ben under center. They hit on more
they
explosive
did.
passes.
They
They
did.
moved the ball fine. They had no problem racking up yards. But when it came to scoring and
Execution, maybe.
executing important plays, they weren't able to do it. And I've come to a couple of, or I'd say one big conclusion on this is that they miss not having a mobile quarterback. Is that especially when we think about last year and what they were able to do with the amount of potential ball carriers on a given play, it made them really hard to stop on third and fourth down. Because
Right.
especially if it was short, you could give it off to 5 or 6 guys to go
Right.
pick it up. This year, how many? One? I think it's probably just whoever's the running back for the
Yeah.
most part. So it's not having that, and it's not having the quarterback ability to run when you take Giovanni out of the game. It like we know Ben's a limited athlete, and Gunderson did say when we talked to him this week that there were run plays in for Ben that they didn't call. I think a reason due to that was because Ben got chased down by a near 300-pound defensive
He
lineman
did.
rolling out to the far
He
sideline
did.
during the game.
Ryan, I remember
So
you. You remember you looking at me. You're like, "Oh, Ben got chased down by a defensive lineman."
Yeah.
Like
It's
he
like
made that
we're doing
comment
this.
next to me.
yeah.
I'm like,
So
I just, yeah.
like
Yeah.
hearing from a couple of fans, there are some legitimate there are some legitimate arguments that I've heard from people that thought Giovanni McCoy would have won this game solely based on what he could do with his legs and what the Beavers actually needed to do to win this game. You know, maybe they could have been marginally better. I'm to the point right now again where I don't think there's that much of a difference in terms of overall offensive success between any of the three quarterbacks.
Now
But
I'll say,
that argument's
yeah.
out there for what they needed.
I'll say this. It is a fair argument. It's one I asked, we've asked amongst ourselves, right? I think I texted Ryan, texted you guys. We were talking about this too, because it's an interesting question. I'll say this. It would be different, right? Like, let's look at it. Would Trent Walker have 11 receptions for 151 yards if McCoy was under center? I'm not so sure. I'm really not. I know Trent
Probably.
Walker's had some decent games, right? But I think the game plan and offensive execution would have been different. So do you put yourself in the red zone as many times, right? Are you turning the ball over, at all, right? Maybe there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, and I know that there's, that argument could be there. Sure, maybe you're a little bit more mobile. Maybe the option package works. Now, I will say this, like, other than, and Ryan and I checked on this too. Other than Nevada, where Giovanni McCoy had to throw a lot just to get Oregon State back in that game, this was second highest passing total of an Oregon State quarterback all year at 292 yards. Now, granted, you'll say, Ben didn't throw any touchdowns, he had two picks. I get that. But you have to still, like we said, TJ was saying earlier, Jermaine Terry was a bit more involved. The play action game deeper downfield seemed to be there a little bit more. So there were some, and again, my favorite positive of the night, and again, there weren't a whole lot. Saladin Allah, he finally had his breakout game, in my opinion. I know he didn't score, but having 9 carries for 68 yards, 7.5 yards a carry, he looked good. And, again, San Jose State defense, take what you will, but he had a good game. He looks very different from Anthony Hankerson as far as being a bit shiftier, more, being able to bounce it outside, make guys miss. And I think that element's kind of been missing with the ground game. So that's kind of one of the few positives I was able to glean from this game. They're obviously committing to Ben going forward. I'm curious your thoughts on that, both of you guys. It didn't really surprise me, but I look at it as we talked, or the question was asked to Trent Bray, would you look to consider young guys with where the season is? And he said, we're still going to play the guys to win. When I heard that, I kind of figured they were going to roll with Ben again, but I don't think anything's set in stone. Like if Ben has a bad game against Air Force, I think it could be still open. I mean, with the quarterback position, guys, I feel like they're just putting a Band-Aid on a bad situation, in my opinion.
It doesn't really make any sense to play so Jabbar's the guy people want to see, obviously.
I guess.
The Air Force game is the only game where it makes sense to play him. Does it benefit Jabari Johnson to play a 9 a.m. game on a Friday against
Black Friday? Black Friday, 9 a.m., baby.
Black Friday against a playoff team? Probably not. I don't think that really benefits him. Does it benefit him to play a 10-win Wazoo, or it will be a 10-win or 9-win Wazoo team at home? Probably not. It's
right.
It's just
I'm with you.
Right? So if it was going to play the young guys, I get it. But it's just not. It's not the only game it's beneficial, I think, is this weekend. And they've made their decision. So because they can still make a bowl game if they upset one of the final two teams.
Yeah, and again, I guess, Oregon State, again, we're going to say this. They're favored against Air Force. Again, if they take care of business, they could get a win. And as I was mentioning to Ryan before we started this podcast is, things can happen. Oregon State can beat Washington State. I'm not saying that's an impossibility. What I am saying is I don't really see a scenario in which they beat Boise, at all, even in a, Rudy type, situation. I just don't see it. That's going to be a very, very difficult game. So, and that's why I think there's the air's kind of been let out of the balloon, fellas, because we all knew it. We talked about it last week. Let's not, discount calling a spade a spade. We said they needed to beat San Jose State and Air Force. Drop the ball against San Jose State. I think at this point, for lack of better terms, unless they go pull something miraculous, play their best game of the season against Washington State, they don't deserve to go to the postseason. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's it's just more of the inconsistencies have just been there all season. And that's the thing. You just haven't seen a consistent performance out of this team, and in particular, it's sure, if that locker room, for example, feels that they could, that they can win out these next 2 games, if they feel that way, it's hey, look, talk is cheap, just show us that, that you're able to put together a consistent performance through 4 quarters of play, because we haven't seen that.
All year.
We have not seen that. And regardless of whoever's starting behind, at quarterback, it's whether that be Ben, whether it be Jabari, whether you play him, you have to this weekend. It's that's not even, Air Force is not even a pushover game either, where you have to be as disciplined as possible on defense and win the turnover battle. And if you can do that, it's and carry that over into the next week against Wazoo, maybe you have a chance, a very slim chance, but maybe you have a chance. But
it exists. It exists.
But yeah, it's just I get what you're saying there. It's just we just haven't seen that all year, and finally this is the time that they pulled around. It's does it really, a bowl game's a bowl game in the end, the way that I view it, but does it really, make that much of a difference at
Yeah, I
this
mean,
point,
yeah,
given kind of the inconsistencies that we've seen all year? Those practices, yeah, are going to be
yeah.
beneficial if you somehow make it to a bowl game. But like, I think there's a lot more that this staff has got to do to reevaluate where this team is at headed into next season.
Yeah, no, I think everything you mentioned, right? And I was going to mention really the practices. I think that'd be the most valuable. But now, I mean, again, you look at it, ESPN gives them a 26% chance to get to the 6 win mark. And I think that's even generous, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
was going
Like,
to say that's a
I think,
little generous.
but again, like I was mentioning to Ryan, and this is no disrespect to Washington State, but historically, like there is a game where the Cougs just don't show up. That's, I mean, the term Cougan has exist. Now, is it naive to think that's going to happen against Oregon State? 100%. I'm not saying it is or anything. I'm just saying that, like, that I think is why the chance exists. And, for what it is, like, that's a whole different problem for next week. You first have to go win at Air Force, which Ryan mentioned. That's where we're going to transition now to the Falcons because while folks, again, Oregon State really missed their opportunity, as TJ mentioned, to get a second, get get off the schneid, get that win against San Jose State, and you'd be working at 5 wins, only needing to beat Air Force to go to bowl eligibility. Now you're still kind of behind the 8 ball and really looking just to snap this 4 game losing streak to find something positive. I mean, beyond going to a bowl game, guys, how big would it be for them just to find something positive amidst what's been a really negative month plus, going back to since the Nevada game? And, that's where I think Air Force presents another opportunity for a win. But, to break it down, guys, let's start with you, TJ. This is the most unique offense they're going to face all year. I know how much you love previewing offenses for us. You loved talking about Brennan Marion's go-go offense. You mentioned the San Jose State offense this last week. Let's talk about the triple option, man, because it's not ran. A very inexperienced, I'm not going to say, well, relative inexperience on the whole. Like, how many guys on Oregon State's roster do you think have defended the triple option since maybe high school? Well, since high school, I'll say none. But like, you'd have to go back to like their, middle school, probably high school days to where you run kind of a bit more of a triple option. I mean, I know my high school ran a little bit of something like that a little bit. And, you see that a lot at the high school level and stuff. But college, that is a challenge for Keith Hayward and his group. And that's where we're going to start with Air Force. Let's just start with you, TJ. The challenges of playing a team like Air Force that is going to run, and run some more.
Mix in a pass or two. They passed the ball 6 times, including once for a touchdown against Fresno State in their win last week. But it is your pretty typical under center single back option offense. Whenever you turn on a service academy game, this is pretty much what it looks like. It is
Right.
different than the options UNLV ran. UNLV runs, when we talked about the go-go offense, it's based around the option, but with different formations and obviously significantly more skilled personnel when it comes to football. Not flying fighter jets, but playing football. UNLV's got a little bit more talent than Air Force does. But the formations are very different because I don't think Air Force runs the option out of the shotgun with 2 running backs lined to the right very often. But it does ultimately come down to discipline. UNLV never broke off huge gaping runs. They did overall run the ball really well against Oregon State. 40 attempts at 4.5 a carry is really good for the UNLV offense. And we've mentioned this year that the Beavers really do struggle defending the edge.
Right.
And we couldn't tell if like Thomas Collins coming back last week had much of an effect on the running game. San Jose State was fine running the football, but they didn't really need to run the football because they were passing the football.
No, they did not.
Pretty enough to win the football game. So the Beavers will have the better athletes on the field. The Air Force head coach Troy Calhoun, whose mom he mentioned lives 5 minutes away or 5 blocks from
local guy. Local guy, man. I love it.
Funniest thing ever. I had no idea. But he looked at the Oregon State roster, and I assume by this he meant comparing it to his own and said that team should be 8-1. They have Power 5 guys all over the place. So that's, I would say, the view from the other side of how he views his personal matchup against the Beavers. It could be very well that the Beavers could just physically, for the first time this season, and the only time this season physically imposed in the trenches because they are just that much more talented than the team on the other side, right?
Right.
And when you have that kind of talent, no matter how well you're executing the option, if your line can't block because they physically just can't, then it's game over. But if the discipline's not there and the Beavers are not reading the dive guy or the guy going out to the edge, like that is going to be an issue. So we'll see. Like
Wait.
it's all about discipline. Defending
Yeah.
that.
So I must have missed that. So Troy Calhoun said Oregon State should be 8-1.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
He's
That is. I
probably
must have
a
missed
very
that.
small minority of people
Yeah,
that feel
that
that
is
way.
assuming the loss to Oregon. I mean, I mean, and also I got to say this. Shout out to a fellow 503, born and raised in McMinnville, TJ. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then I believe then he spent most of his time in Roseburg, and then went on from there. But truly a 503, 541 guy. Like he is a Oregonian, and also obviously Air Force alum, right? Who's been there. And the thing that I respect a lot about Troy Calhoun, unlike Army and Navy, who have had recent success, and everybody's been like, oh my gosh, Army, Navy, the playoff, the this, the that. Air Force has quietly been like steadily solid under Troy Calhoun for like 15 years. Like you go look, since he became head coach in '07, they have only not made a bowl game one, two, three, four, and then this will be the fifth year. And I'm not talking like bad years. 9 wins, 8 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins, 8 wins, 10 wins, a couple 2021, 10 wins, 2022, 10 wins, 2023, 9 wins. And this is still Mountain West. So this is the team that has been the class of the Mountain West these last couple years. They didn't really get over the hump as far as, winning the Mountain West championship. But just very steady as far as the service academy goes. And I'm, this was a year they're quote down. And I think Oregon State, is able to get that. Your argument about the argument about the athletes, TJ, it's an interesting one. I don't really know if like Oregon State's. I mean, I know they're going to have better athletes than Air Force, but considering how well Air Force plays in their system, I think they negate that a little bit on a week to week basis. Which is interesting.
Not as much this year.
Yeah, Ryan, what do you think of Calhoun's comments? Because again, that's kind of interesting. I must have missed that in his press conference, TJ.
I was like,
Because
that is
fascinating.
kind of wild. I'm like,
Ryan's like, how?
I mean,
Yeah, I was thinking how it's
that's
like how
kind
they
of
could have flipped the Cal game. It's like, yeah, they could have done.
Okay, maybe 7-2. Let's talk
Yeah.
7-2.
yeah. I was gonna say like I'm like maybe I'm like hey, Troy, did you have this picked scheduled before the start of the season?
Maybe so.
Is that what you is that where you're basing this off of? But I'm like that's kind of wild. I'm like,
Yeah, it was
that's
interesting.
a little high there, a little too high for my liking. I like to keep my expectations low so that way I don't get too high, too low
So
on anything.
what do you,
But the point on the athletes though, it's like
yeah.
for me, like the way I view it is everybody, like regardless of talent, regardless of athleticism, regardless of any like physical intangibles, it's what it really comes down to what more have you done to separate yourself from the rest of the competition, like at the highest levels of things. And I have a very limited experience in my own competitive background, but like that's kind of where I see it. So it's like even though like Oregon State will have better athletes on paper compared to Air Force, like
Mhm.
I still think, those guys are pretty confident in their system, and being confident in your system, knowing what you're able to do against, you did it against an opponent in Fresno State. I think this is going to be a little bit of a tougher matchup than I think initially people picked at the start of this season.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, I think going into the year, I thought it was going to be. I didn't think like I knew Air Force graduate. I didn't think Air Force kind of the bottom would fall out. But if you kind of look again, going back, it must be in kind of the Troy Calhoun DNA and how they do things. Because again, every few years they have a down year, right? It's almost kind of like they're going with that Oregon State mold. They maybe play guys young and then get the best out of them on the back end, kind of a thing. Because again, this is still a team that went 9-4 last year, and be that as it may, they lost some guys for sure. But again, a team that's going to run the ball, and I know my thing is we haven't seen a team, guys, like really target the Oregon State run game. Like, or run defense, I should say. Like, in recent weeks, like I think the low light of it was Nevada, obviously. And then since then, it's gotten better on paper, but it's also been like teams like San Jose State and Cal haven't need excuse me, haven't needed to throw it or haven't needed to run it as much. And I'm just kind of curious, this team that's like you said, they're going to, how do you like I'm curious to kind of see like that, put that metal to the road, so to speak, and see if those improvements are there. Thomas Collins, all those things you mentioned, TJ.
I think teams realize there are multiple weaknesses to this Beaver defense.
Hmm.
I think they realize they could sit back there and pass as well because the pass rush is as bad or worse than the run defense.
Yeah, it's really bad. It might be the worst individual thing on this team. It might
It might be I think it's the worst pass rush in the country.
It's yeah. I mean,
It's
I'd have to
close.
look at I'd have to look at the numbers, but it's close. It is. I mean, what do you
So
mean? Yeah,
once you can't pressure the quarterback, it doesn't even matter if you can defend the run or not.
right, right.
So
And Ryan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean that's essentially what it is, right? Like you get two different ways of attacking this team, and I think Cal pretty much showed the book of how you can do it through the air, and San Jose State literally took it and changed the name on the defensive play call sheet pretty much for the most part. But yeah, if you can't get any pressure, like regardless in either a run or pass scenario, you're screwed as a defense.
Yeah,
Like if a quarterback has more than 5 seconds to sit back there in the pocket and just scan the defense and what they're presenting to him, yeah, it's going to be a long day, and that was even
yeah,
the case against San Jose State, where Egan just had all day to throw back there and couldn't even really get any pressure whatsoever. That was something to me where I was just like, yeah, this is definitely an issue, and it also hurts too. And I think I was a little optimistic about it initially at the start of the season. It hurts when you lose four defensive linemen to
yeah.
start the season.
Oh yeah.
So that's another thing where it
And
kind of did them in, I think, a little bit. And you get at least three of those guys back in Hickle, Norris, and Howard for next year.
right,
But like sure, having one of those guys might have helped. And even also to Ty.G. Hill for
right. As I
whatever his
mentioned.
absence from this team has been. But like at least you get that for next year. But I think if you're Oregon State, you go get a guy in the portal to help with pass rush. You can't have too many pass rushers, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
mean it's that, and I think you look at just how the loss of depth at edge, right? I mean, you're talking last year you had guys like Drew Chatfield, John McCartan, Corey Stover, so on and so forth, and I think Nico Taylor has been admirable in that spot. Olu, we know what Olu's playing with, a torn labrum. He said it earlier in the year. He's playing through that. I can't imagine that's a comfortable state of playing, Ryan. And we're probably you're not getting his absolute best, and credit to the kid for toughing it out, because that can't be an easy injury to play through. But like, yeah, you lost a lot edge rushers too. It's not just the D line, it's those guys at outside linebacker too. But no, just wanted to quickly run through, like, Air Force obviously got off their big losing streak and beat Fresno State, who's kind of had a down year this year. But again, very consistent, like in their losses. Like they only allowed 17 to San Jose State in a loss. They had a bad game against Baylor, 31. Same with Wyoming, 31. Navy put an ugly score on them, 34. Something really broke against New Mexico when they allowed 52. But in recent weeks,
Hey, put some respect on the Lobos. I will not tolerate disrespect there. But
you might be the only
but
person in
yeah,
America.
no, continue.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. But no, again, and then you go back to a comment like 21 points to Colorado State in a one possession loss. Common opponent, just going to throw that out there. Same with San Jose State, 10-point loss for them. Then Army, 17 points to an Army team that we thought was still pretty good this year. And then they bounced back with Fresno State. So if Oregon State's not prepared for this game, fellas, I could see them losing this game. Like, I loosely have them. I can see, like, the spread is fair. Could I see them winning by 3 points? Absolutely. It's what I had in our closer look pick. But it wouldn't surprise me if they faltered in this game because it looks to me as I read this schedule, Air Force has started to figure some things out in the last couple weeks, and they're maybe trending upwards. I don't know if Oregon State's trending anywhere but neutral or down right now. So we'll see. That can obviously change, but that's kind of my thoughts on this one.
There's the dynamic of this game is that the possessions are going to be so few
Yes, there
between the
will
two
be.
teams.
Time of possession war.
If you miss out on one red zone possession, the impact of that compared to the impact of what it would have been versus San Jose State is enormous.
You're right.
Think of just your standard game. Gundy was trying to map it out. He said, like, in a fast-paced game, you'll get about, no, sorry. He said in a normal game, you'll get about 13 possessions, give or take. Beavers are right at about 10 possessions per game. He said this game, it might be 7. So you
Oh
gotta,
my goodness. Yeah.
so you gotta, like, if you miss out on a red zone opportunity and then you give a touchdown on the next drive, it almost feels like it's worth twice as much.
Right.
Just
Right.
because of the lack of ability for you to get those possessions and stack them up and score more than one touchdown in a response.
Right. I mean, Ryan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's what it's going to come down to. And having watched the second half, so obviously didn't get to see the first half, but where Fresno really struggled was over committing to the run a few
Hmm.
times. And just like
Interesting.
and that was something where like I also think too that they can't kind of do that. And they just have to be like the lack of discipline on defense very much showed. And Fresno, I thought, was the better team kind of going into that matchup, but yeah, the possessions are going to be huge because if you don't take care of the football, there's going to be a long period of game time that you're not going to have that football, and that's you're going to have to play from behind. And we've seen that
Right.
this team is not necessarily designed to play from behind and
Right.
keep up that way on offense. But yeah, it's just one of those games where I think this can go either way. If you at least get what you've seen in the run defense these past couple of weeks against Air Force, I think they got a solid shot of winning this game. But otherwise, if not, yeah, I could easily see them losing this game.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Again, I'm just curious to see if Oregon State can find something to be positive about. Like I said, it's been a very negative month. There hasn't been a whole lot of, positivity on the side of the football team, except for, some recruits you got coming in and things along that nature because, it's kind of been, again, a losing streak, and Oregon State needs to, right the ship to have something to close this year on ultimately. And then, you can't get to 6 wins without getting to 5 wins. So it literally is, one win at a time, but you have to start stacking up wins. So I'm curious to see how all that shakes out. Again, 12:30 is going to be an early kickoff for the second straight road game. So Oregon State will be taking on Air Force on Saturday. We're going to close out the pod by switching gears and talking a little bit about the Oregon State men's and women's teams. Men's team sitting 3-0, undefeated on the year with wins over Utah Tech, Weber State, and Western Oregon. They'll take on Fullerton tomorrow and then a matchup with Oregon next week. So that's mighty intriguing on that side. Again, the Oregon State women's basketball team, they get their first win the other night, defeating Northwest Nazarene after falling to Colorado State early in the year. Let's just kind of on the surface, just like talk about it, guys, because many fans will be like, all right, so now that football has kind of been a bit of a rough thing, transition on. And so far anyway, again, the competition I don't think has been world beaters. But nevertheless, Wayne Tinkle's team's 3-0. Fullerton is winless on the year, who they got coming in on Friday night, and I think they'll probably go to 4-0. And then you got a matchup with Oregon, who is always a little up and down early in the year before they turn it on late. So maybe something positive for the Oregon State men's basketball team. And I was kind of mentioning it to you guys at the game on Saturday. I was like, it's kind of like that. That's kind of like the MO of Wayne Tinkle. Like you'll have a couple kind of down years, and then you'll kind of be like, oh, wow, this team can actually play. Curious to see what happens as they get into the meat of the schedule this year. But, early on, it's looking like they'll at least be entertaining to watch. Ryan, do you kind of have that kind of same mindset?
Oh yeah. But then again, I kind of had my expectations low for this team anyway. So
Me too, for sure. I'm
whatever
sure
they finish
TJ did too. Yeah, I mean,
with
he's probably
whatever the
not.
men's team
Yeah,
ends up finishing with this season, I'll be pleasantly surprised by. But from generally what I've sort of been able to catch through 3 games is this team's a little more competitive. They're a little more playing together.
yeah,
And one of the
great
biggest
way.
things that like I had heard kind of behind the scenes was it was a lot of like uh egos kind of get in the way. Guys really weren't buying into Wayne's system. And I think you also now have guys that kind of are and they're playing all together and you see what, he's capable of doing with a roster that's actually bought in. And that's what I think did him in after that Elite Eight season was
Right.
kind of the success of that combined with egos in the locker room and that led to that 3-28 year and kind of struggling since that kind of period in time. But I think they'll continue to get better over time. I just need to see if they can sustain that level of success through non-conference and into the actual conference schedule part as well too before kind of leaning whichever way where I think they'll end up at the end of this
Right.
season. But I'm impressed with what I've seen through 3 games. I can't
Yeah.
can't complain too much. And then for women's basketball, that's I think one where a lot of fans are going to have to exercise some patience a little bit. They're gonna figure some things out. I know a lot of people were kind of disappointed, losing the Colorado State, but I'm like, you're essentially starting your bench from
Yeah.
last year, with the exception of AJ Morant, uh, and you're trying to figure out where all these new pieces fit
Yeah.
in on the roster on top of that as well. But I think they'll figure things out over time and slowly get better as the season progresses. But I think for Beaver fans, kind of expecting women's basketball to kind of be kind of otherworldly or on top of or close to the level of men's basketball this year, I'd hold off a little bit on saying that for right now until I see a little bit more from both squads.
Right. I
So
mean,
that's the way that I kind of look at
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great stuff. And to TJ's point earlier, I'm very curious to see how Oregon State does in both men's and women's on the WCC because again, to TJ's point earlier, Oregon State temporary member of the WCC, with the exception of Gonzaga, they still have more. Go back to TJ's resources discussion, right? So it means a lot less in basketball, but there is an argument that, hey, right, you look at Oregon State's schedule, like, sure, the 2 matchups against Gonzaga, pretty daunting. Is there anybody else on the schedule who you're like, Oregon State can't beat? No, probably not. So the schedule is going to be different. I think there'll be opportunities for them to knock in wins this year. And, it could end up being a good year. Now that you're in the WCC, you're probably having to have a near perfect year to get, at large bids or need to get the conference title. So you're probably angling more towards like NIT type stuff. But still, I think Oregon State fans would just like to see a winner on the men's basketball hardwood. That'd be cool to see. And then on the women's side, just to close up that point, Ryan said Scott Rulick's a hell of a coach, and he will have a competitive unit time in, time out. There'll be some times they're down, rebuilding, so to speak, reloading. And that may be what this year is, but we'll wait and see. Again, they're in the WCC as well. So just want to thank the guys for jumping on this podcast with me, talking some San Jose State, some Air Force, and then some men's and women's basketball. We'll obviously be bringing you guys coverage of the road game this weekend, so make sure to stay locked in at BeaversEdge.com as we bring you guys the coverage and then ultimately look ahead to Oregon State's final home game next week against Washington State. So stay locked to BeaversEdge.com. You'll see all of our predictions tomorrow, the injury report, a few other things as well, getting you guys ready for the Beavers and Falcons. This is for TJ Mathewson, Ryan Harlan. This is Brenden Slaughter signing off in this edition of the Edge Podcast.